is fantasy that is set in a world that is completely fantastic. It doesn't exist, it's not in our world. On the other hand, a low fantasy is a world or a setting that is set in our world, even though it's still a fantasy interpretation of it. So, based on this categorization, Harry Potter and Conan would be low fantasy, as they are set in our world, while Dungeons and Dragons, for instance, Forgotten Realms or Dragonlance, Dark Sun, these are all high fantasy, and so would be a Dragon Age, for instance, although that's more of a dark fantasy, because it's set in a completely different world, and the same would be with Heroes of Might and Magic, for instance. That I would consider high fantasy. Erathia is not on our world. Now, this is my interpretation, and that's how I classify it. Warhammer is clearly inspired by our world. Like, you can see how the Empire are pretty much Germans, and as I was saying, Bretonnians are kind of like French, but it doesn't seem to be actually set in our world. But regardless, even if you could prove and tell me, no, I read these 15 books and I'm an expert on the lore, it is low fantasy because it's set in our world, still, it's fantasy, and there are dragons flying around. Now, I also noticed that some people classify high fantasy as a setting where there is a high presence of magic, and low fantasy as a setting that is still fantasy, but the magic is either non-present, or if it is present, there isn't that much of it. Or maybe it's illegal and it's very rare. Do you use this kind of classification? Usually I don't, but even in that scenario, Warhammer would be a high fantasy for sure, because there are plenty of mages, there are undead, there are liches, there are necromancers, there are dragons flying around. Yeah, even in that definition would be a high fantasy. But regardless, in a world full of dragons and monsters and orcs and goblins, diverging slightly from a historical reality to create the concept of a woman knight, to me, isn't that big of a problem. Now, given if this were a video game or a setting or a board game or a tabletop miniatures game that was set in our real world and it was preaching to be historically accurate, like for instance Kingdom Come Deliverance did, and then they start introducing female knights all over the place, then yeah, I would have a problem with that, because, well, now stop saying that you are historically accurate at that point, which is why there are indeed some areas in Kingdom Come Deliverance that people can have a problem with due to a lack of historical accuracy, and I might make a dedicated video to it. But Warhammer has got the dragons flying, so I personally don't have a problem with this. Now, given some people could tell me, okay, from a fantasy perspective you can justify it, but what if they're doing it because they want to push the message of a feminist, independent girl boss? Well, once again, I think we need to start with the idea of if. If means innocent until proven guilty. And whether or not that would be guilty would really very much depend on how it's represented. If said knightly hero is well created, well written, and is not trying to constantly preach modern politics, then I have no problems with it whatsoever. Even if we see in a scene that through magic, she's got a magic ring, she's got a magic sword, and she's an experienced knight, and she defeats men in combat, even though they are bigger and stronger, it's fine. At that point, I wouldn't have a problem with it. So it would be a very much of a case-by-case scenario. Are they writing it in an obnoxious way, like they did for Dragon Age Veilguard? Then I'm going to have a big problem with it. But if they write it in a way that it's instead conducive to a wonderful tale and a good fantasy, and they're not trying to push any strange politics that would diminish the value of the tale or the story due to anachronism, and most importantly, an anachronistic school of thought, then if they're doing that, I would have a problem with it. So as I say, it's a case-by-case situation. And it is important, I think, to be able to not fall for the logical fallacy of attacking everything and starting to call everything political message, political message, political message. I've also noticed people, for instance, complaining about the hairstyle. They were saying, look, she's got the short hair side, I think they were saying, and then this means they're trying to push the idea of strong, independent woman. I'm sorry, but that's how I mean, maybe not exactly today, although then again, that's what I do with my hair. I keep it on the side. I do this all the time. I think that's what they're doing, that if anything, I think their hair should be a little longer. But do notice one thing. If this was really one of those situations where we know that there are people that are trying to push specific messages, would they really have chosen a white woman with red hair, a ginger hair? A white ginger hair is the antichrist to some of those people, and you know the type of extremists that I'm talking about. So in this situation, yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, I don't think they would have done this at this point if this was really the situation. I could be wrong. Maybe in a little bit, we're going to start having people with modern ideas into Warhammer. And if that happens, that's when I'm going to make the video about it and I'm going to complain. But I'm not going to complain just because there is a female warrior or a female knight on the half chance that maybe they're trying to push some ideologies, because this is fine. And in fact, I would field one. I would deploy it. I would have the miniature of a woman paladin, and then I would paint her. I would do a redhead like this, probably. And then I would put her on the, even if only to upset some people, and then I would put her as like the hero inside a Knights of the Realm unit. And I think that would be awesome. I do not see a problem with it. Unfortunately, I think we're getting to a point where we have become too sensitive to anything. And there is a reason. There is a reason why this has happened. It's because, yeah, people have pushed their hand too much. And this idea of we're going to put politics and write things in a way that is absolutely horrible. But then if anyone complains about it, we're going to call you racist, or we're going to call you homophobe and all that. Yeah, people are sick of it. But we have to still maintain a position of justice. We shouldn't get to a point where now we do what we accuse other people of doing, which is